The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. Reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus spoke to the crowds about the kingdom of God, and he healed those who needed to be cured. As the day was drawing to a close, the 12 approached him and said, "Dismiss the crowd so that they can go to the surrounding villages and farms and find lodging and provisions, for we are in a deserted place." He said to them, "Give them some of your food." They replied, 5 loaves and 2 fish are all we have, unless we ourselves go and buy food for all these people." Now the men there numbered about 5,000. And he said to his disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of about 50. They did so, and made them all sit down. Then taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he said the blessing over them, broke them, and gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. They all ate and were satisfied. And when the leftover fragments were picked up, they filled 12 wicker baskets. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, here we are, another Memorial Day weekend. Many of us will be getting together with family and friends, and when we sit down for the meal, we generate a special sense of togetherness. Each one of us have our own memories of shared meals and fellowship. Many of these experiences are of celebration and laughter, a lot of the love we've received over the years. But some memories may be sad. Times when we're more aware of one who's absent, more so than those who are present. As a matter of fact, Memorial Day is that special day when we remember the men and women of our armed services who've sacrificed everything for the freedoms that we enjoy. Jesus shared a table. Many times with his disciples, they sat around. And they stayed there and talked. And Jesus shared his thoughts, his dreams. The special meal that they always talk about is the one we know best, the Last Supper. And it's that Last Supper that we celebrate here at Mass. You know, in today's second reading from St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, he gives us account of the Last Supper. You know, and in that Last Supper, Jesus did more than share that vision he had with his disciples. He gave himself to them in a very special way. And in giving himself in the form of bread and wine in that meal, he was declaring himself to be their food and drink. In calling on them to take and eat and to take and drink, he was asking them to take their stand with him, to give themselves to him as he was giving himself to them and to us. Jesus intended that Last Supper to be a beginning rather than an ending. That was our first Eucharist. Ever since that meal, the church has gathered regularly in his name to do and to say what he did at that Last Supper. Taking bread and wine, blessing both, breaking the bread and giving it to his disciples to eat and to drink. Now in today's Gospel, we hear another story about a very special meal. And it tends to make sense to me why the church shows the particular Gospel story for today on the Feast of the Body and Blood of Christ. The primary theme of this feast is the nourishment that Jesus offers us in the Blessed Sacrament. We are that hungry crowd. And we're reminded that Jesus offers us a nourishment that fully satisfies our needs. Now, there's obviously something very miraculous in the way in which Jesus solved the problem of the hungry crowd. And we're just like the disciples. We face overwhelming problems in our own world. How do we solve it? There's so much violence and injustice and so many other things going on that are out of our control. We feel paralyzed at the challenge. Like the disciples, we feel we don't have enough resources to deal with the problems. But Jesus tells us to take what little we have and to do what we can with it. I think there's an implied promise that God will join us and turn our 5 loaves and 2 fish into food for the multitude, with an abundance left over. As individuals, we aren't going to save the world. I can't feed all the hungry people. I don't believe you can clothe all the naked or comfort all those who are mourning or sad. But we can make a difference. There's an old story about a young girl who was walking along the beach. And on that beach were thousands of starfish that had been washed up by a storm. When that little girl came to each starfish, she'd bend down, pick it up, and throw it back. And you know how a lot of these beaches are in the morning. There's people everywhere. And they were watching her with amusement. And she'd been doing this for some time when a man approached her and said, "Little girl, why are you doing this? Look at this beach. You can't save all these starfish. You can't even begin to make a difference." Well, the little girl seemed crushed. But after a few moments, she bent down, picked up another starfish, and hurled it as far as she could. She looked at the man and said, "I made a difference to that one." You know, a lot of times that story ends right there. But there's more to the story. Inspired that man, joined the little girl in throwing starfish back into the sea. And soon a lot of other people joined. And before you know it, all those starfish were back where they belonged. Now, individually, we see a daunting, almost impossible task. But together, with all of us contributing what little we can, and with Jesus' participation, we can accomplish more than we ever believed. As we celebrate the Eucharist, we find a superabundance that can nourish us in spite of our great need. In the Mass, Jesus offers Himself under the appearance of a few small wafers and a few drops of wine. And in that, it's a way that He can nourish the whole world. Those of us who share that divine meal should not only feel wonderfully refreshed, but also empowered to share our good fortune with all those hungry people we encounter. No matter how poor we are, we become rich for ourselves and for others when we receive that immeasurable gift of God's love in the Eucharistic banquet.